My mother said I was a mistake born out of pity. I became the mistake she needed desperately. My name is Nora Quinn, and I was 8 years old when my mother told me I was a mistake. She stood by the kitchen window, sunlight spilling across her diamond bracelet, her tone almost casual. "You weren't supposed to exist," she said. "You were a pity project, something I kept because I didn't have the heart to throw away." I remember staring at the dust floating in the light, trying to decide if she was joking. She was. That sentence built a wall inside me, cold, thick, and endless. From that day, every gesture she made felt calculated. Every smile was performance. She called me ungrateful when I cried, sensitive when I flinched, crazy when I tried to defend myself. People said my mother, Vivian Quinn, was elegance personified, a celebrated pianist, a widow who rebuilt her life through strength and grace. They didn't see the way she looked at me when no one was watching, as if I was a stain on her perfect image. I learned early that love in our house was not given, it was earned, and then taken away the moment you reached for it. When my sister Selene was born, my mother finally found someone worthy of her affection. Selene was soft, golden, and obedient, everything I was. From the moment she could speak, she was told she was special. By 5, she had a music tutor. By 10, she had her own piano. And me, I was the helper, the one who cleaned the keys, pressed record on the camcorder during performances, and disappeared during family photos so the frame looked balanced. I loved her though, in some twisted way I wanted to protect her from our mother's moods, but Vivian made sure there was no bond between us. She whispered to Selene that I was unstable, that I lied for attention. I didn't know that at the time, but I could feel it in Selene's distance, in her polite avoidance of my hugs. One night when I was 12, I overheard my mother telling her friend on the phone, "Selene was my redemption, Nora was my punishment." That was the night I stopped trying to win her love, but I didn't know then that love, once denied, can turn into something far more dangerous. I learned silence early, it became my shield. When my mother scolded me for things I didn't do, I stopped defending myself. When she accused me of jealousy towards Selene, I just smiled. Silence made me invisible, and invisibility meant safety. At school, teachers said I was quiet but observant. They didn't know I was cataloguing human behavior like a scientist, studying tones, reactions, and micro-expressions. I was learning how lies worked. At home, Vivian's world revolved around her image, the charity galas, the piano recitals, the endless praise she craved from others. I was her private failure, hidden in the attic rooms. Once during a family dinner, she laughed and told the guests, "Nora is such a sensitive child, she takes everything personally." Everyone chuckled, I did too, but later when the guests left, she slapped me for embarrassing her by staying quiet. That night I realized something. Vivian didn't want obedience, she wanted submission, and she was training me to break the way she could control best, through humiliation. When I turned 17, I received a scholarship letter from the Royal Academy of Art. It was everything I had worked for years of secret sketches and stolen time in the attic. I ran downstairs, shaking, the envelope in my hand. Vivian took the letter, smiled, then tore it clean in half. She told me I wasn't mentally stable enough to live alone, that the world would eat me alive. Her voice was calm, motherly even, but her eyes, they were proud. That was the day I understood she didn't just dislike me, she needed me small. My dependence was her validation. If I left, who would she belittle? Who would remind her of her power? I cried for hours that night, sitting by the torn pieces of my dream. When Selene came in, I thought she'd comfort me. Instead, she said softly, "Mom's only trying to protect you. You shouldn't make her upset." Then she left, closing the door like she was shutting away something contagious. I realized I had no allies, only witnesses to my suffering, and none brave enough to see the truth. 2 years later, my mother claimed she was sick. Her hands trembled during breakfast, her voice grew frail, and she said she needed round-the-clock care. Doctors ran tests, nothing. She insisted they'd missed something. So I stayed, I cooked, cleaned, and managed her endless appointments. Selene was away at college, so the burden fell to me. Months passed. Vivian's health never worsened, but her control did. She began faking fainting spells whenever I spoke of leaving. She guilted me with lines like, "You wouldn't abandon your dying mother, would you?" Her illness was her masterpiece, her final chain. One night I found her standing by the mirror, perfectly steady, smiling at her reflection. When she saw me, she gasped and clutched her chest, instantly fragile again. That's when I knew she wasn't dying, she was acting. But I stayed quiet, because deep down I was starting to plan. And when I finally left, I wouldn't just escape her, I'd make sure the world saw her the way I did. The cracks in her performance were beginning to show, and I was done being her silent audience. When I turned 21, my mother decided I needed therapy, not for healing but for control. She found a doctor who was her dear friend, a man named Dr. Hensley, who never questioned her version of events. Every session began the same way, with her sitting beside me, painting me as unstable. "She lies for attention," she'd say sweetly. "She invents pain to manipulate sympathy." The doctor nodded, and I sat there silent, my throat closing around words that would never be believed. Over time, those sessions rewired my brain. I began to doubt my own memories. Did she really tear my scholarship letter? Did she really slap me that night? Maybe I'd exaggerated, maybe I was crazy. That's what she wanted, psychological submission. She didn't need to lock me in a room, she made my mind her cage. One evening, I overheard her laughing on the phone, telling someone, "Even her therapist thinks she's unstable. Is that convenient?" I smiled in the dark. For the first time, something inside me didn't break, it hardened. If she could play a role, so could I, and my performance was just beginning. My mother's 50th birthday was a spectacle. Crystal chandeliers, classical music, expensive champagne, and guests whispering about her strength and grace. Celine flew in wearing a designer dress. She and Vivian looked like twins in spirit, polished, rehearsed, perfect. I was told to blend in and behave. Halfway through the night, Vivian raised a glass. "To my beautiful daughters," she said, smiling toward Celine. "And to Nora, who has such a unique heart." The guests laughed politely, unsure if it was a compliment. I stood there, smiling like a mannequin, my stomach burning. Later, while clearing glasses, I heard her whisper to Celine, "Don't end up like her. Weakness is contagious." That night I went to my room and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the girl staring back, pale, hollow-eyed, small. But beneath the sadness I saw something new, resolve, the kind that only grows in darkness, the kind born from too many nights of silent crying. That was the night I promised myself one thing: the next time my mother laughed at my expense, the world would laugh at her. Vivian's illness worsened conveniently whenever she needed sympathy. One week she couldn't walk, the next she was dancing at charity events. She founded a women's organization, the Quinn Foundation for Strength and Renewal. The irony was suffocating. Behind closed doors she berated me for existing. In public she preached empowerment. But the cracks were spreading. One afternoon I found a stack of unopened letters in her study, all from my father, the man she told everyone had abandoned us. My hands shook as I opened them. Each letter was filled with apologies, pleased to see me, promises that he'd sent money, and a trail of unanswered love. She'd hidden them all. She'd told him I refused to speak to him, and she told me he'd chosen another life. That night I cried quietly, the sound of her laughter echoing downstairs. Something inside me died, and something else was born, not hate but clarity. She hadn't ruined me by accident. She needed to destroy me because my pain was her proof of power. And now I finally understood what kind of monster I was living with. The family dinner where Vivian revealed her will felt like a play. Celine sat beside her, glowing with quiet pride. I was there because she insisted on transparency. Her lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. Every asset, every investment, every property left entirely to Celine. I was to receive a small monthly allowance to ensure I didn't fall into hardship. When he finished, Vivian turned to me, eyes shining with false warmth. "I know this is difficult, Nora, but you've never been good with responsibility." Celine looked away, guilt flickering for just a second before fading into practiced indifference. I smiled, a calm, almost serene smile, because what they didn't know was that I had already been documenting everything, the recordings, the financial manipulations, the lies about my father. This wasn't humiliation, it was confirmation, proof that the people I once wanted to love me were exactly who I believed they were. That night, while Vivian celebrated her cleverness, I sat in the attic and began to plan the story I would tell the world. Her story, not the one she performed, the real one. The morning I left, I didn't say goodbye. I simply packed a small suitcase, tucked the letters from my father inside, and walked out the front door. No one stopped me, no one noticed. Vivian had told the world I was unstable, so when I vanished, people nodded knowingly. Poor Nora, they said. She finally lost it. But I hadn't lost my mind. I'd found it, and for the first time I could see her web from the outside. I spent months in a small coastal town, working quietly as an art teacher. During the day, I taught children how to draw light and shadow. At night, I began sketching something darker, portraits of my mother's cruelty, each one sharper, more detailed, more real. But it wasn't enough to draw her truth. I needed to show it. So I began compiling everything I had, recordings, emails, the forged documents, even video clips of her fainting spells. Piece by piece, I built the weapon that would destroy her, not with violence, but with exposure. And as I watched her public image grow brighter, I smiled in the dark, knowing the storm I was building would soon swallow her whole. When I started building my archive, I assumed I was alone. I had recordings, letters, and a pile of falsified medical notes, enough to indict a performative queen. What I hadn't expected was an ally. His name was Marcus Hale, a quiet man who ran the coastal gallery where I sold small prints to students. He, once been a journalist, his face carrying the patient hollows of someone who'd seen too much. He listened the first time I spoke like someone cataloguing evidence, not gossip. "You won't get justice by yelling," he told me. "You'll get it by letting the truth speak in a way people can't ignore." He taught me to format documents, authenticate timestamps, and compress video without losing quality. He showed me how to build a file that would survive legal attacks. Most importantly, he taught me how to speak without breaking. In return, I taught him something he'd lost, how to look people in the eye again. He asked questions that dug deeper than anger, how I'd felt small, what little humiliations had carved the map of my life. His curiosity wasn't exploitative, it was reverent. For the first time since leaving home, I let someone else see the shape of my truth, and when he pressed his palm, brief and steady, against mine as we sealed an encrypted folder, I realized this was no longer a private revenge. It had become a covenant. One night, rifling through Vivian's old financial folders she'd discarded in haste, my fingers brushed a ledger with unfamiliar stamps. Underneath the ribbon of her charitable receipts was a bank account number connected to a shell company. When I called the bank, they asked for proof of authorization. I gave them paper I'd found, invoices, fake board meeting minutes, forged signatures. Every lie she'd spun into reality had left paper footprints. That account was the heart of her foundation. Donations poured in under the banner of rehabilitation, while the money quietly migrated to luxury trusts, foreign properties, and private accounts that benefited only the Quinn name. I replayed recordings of her speech at the foundation's gala, the same speech where she'd said she was building a safe place for broken women. The irony tasted like metal. Celine, of course, knew nothing of the ledgers. She believed in the stagecraft because she thrived on applause. But the ledger told a different story, not empowerment but embezzlement, not healing but hoarding. When I contacted a former accountant who'd left the foundation under suspicious circumstances, he didn't hesitate. He said, "You have enough to trigger an audit." My heart thudded, not with fear, but with something sharp and electric. The ledger was proof that the mother who had weaponized pity had been weaponizing money all along. Now the question was not whether to expose her. It was how to make the world listen without being dismissed as the unstable daughter she trained everyone to expect. I arranged a meeting with Vivian under the pretense of reconciliation. She answered the door in a hospital robe even though she'd staged her last fainting spell 3 nights earlier. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish and theatrical perfumes, her armor. I sat across from her with my hands folded, letting the quiet sit heavy between us. For a moment she regarded me like a curious animal. "You look different," she said. "Older, straighter." I told her I forgave her. I watched confusion ripple across her face like a gull's wing. "Forgiveness is a gift I keep giving," I said softly, "but gifts should never be forced into the hands of the giver." She laughed, a sound I had heard 1,000 times in the background of my life. "You always were dramatic." Then I slid the first letter on the table. It was one of my father's, an apology written in careful, familiar loops. Vive's fingers fluttered. She had not seen this one before. Her composure shifted into something brittle. "You destroyed him," I said, voice small and steady. "You hid him from me. You turned me into the villain in his story." She looked away and didn't have the theatrical feint she'd practiced for years. For the first time, she was out of script. And in that silence, watching the face she made when cornered, I understood how deep her need to control really was, and how thin the veil that held it together had become. Word moved faster than I expected. A private investigator I'd hired, the one Marcus recommended, called me crying, not from sorrow but from disgust. He'd traced payments, wire transfers and shell companies tied to the Quinn Foundation and to a lawyer Vivian used to launder money. There were receipts for vacations, invoices for renovations, and payments for a woman's medical care that never existed. But the most devastating find was a photograph the investigator sent. Vivian laughing in a seaside villa with a man I'd never met. He had my father's eyes, not Patrick's, someone else younger, his arm around Vivian's waist like a prize. That man's name appeared in a list of offshore beneficiaries. I replayed my childhood conversations in my head, all the versions of abandonment she'd fed me. For years she'd whispered that my father chose to walk away. In truth, she had cut him out of the story and then polished the cut until everyone believed the lie. She had kept his love letters to weaponize me and his absence to justify her narrative. Celine texted me a single line. "Are you okay?" Short, polite, rehearsed. My reply was simply, "I'm fine." It was a lie, but not the kind Vive would relish. I felt a strange peace in owning the truth. The betrayal had a face now, not just the woman who'd called me a mistake, but the woman who'd traded entire lives to maintain an image. And once a betrayal has a face, it can be unmasked. After weeks of assembling every piece, letters, ledgers, recordings, and witnesses' statements, I sat cross-legged on my studio floor and breathed. The files were heavy with memory. Each one carried the weight of a humiliation I'd once swallowed. Marcus watched as I laid out a sequence, a public exposure timed to coincide with the Foundation's gala, an irreversible cascade of proof, edited footage that proved not only malice but pattern. We rehearsed the release like performers. We chose clips that would be undeniable. Vivian admitting to staging fainting spells, board minutes showing diverted funds, the hidden letters proving she'd silenced my father. We planned a press packet, a distributed drop to journalists, and a backup plan in case legal threats came. Marcus insisted we seed copies with multiple outlets to prevent a single takedown. I felt the old hollow tighten in my chest when he said it aloud. "You'll no longer be the unreliable narrator. You'll be the one who compiled the book." At night, I dreamt of the gala room where chandeliers would throw cold light across faces that had once smiled at me. I pictured Vivian's expression when the projector filled with her truth. But under that image was a quieter, fiercer wanting, justice that did not require revenge's cruelty, only truth's clarity. When the plan was finalized, I typed a short message and pressed send to the list of journalists we'd cultivated. My hands trembled, but I did not stop. The file left my computer like a breath released, and as the message traveled into the world, I felt something open inside me, the long-held space where pity had lived, making room for the woman I was becoming. The week before the gala, I went back to the city that had once been my cage. Everything looked smaller, the house, the streets, even the fear. I rented a small room near the river and watched news segments praising my mother's foundation. She was everywhere, smiling, radiant, untouchable. Each appearance was another coat of varnish over rot. Celine called twice. I let the phone buzz until her voice turned brittle on the voicemail. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I was tired of waiting for her to see me. Marcus arrived with final edits stored on encrypted drives. We rehearsed the upload schedule like a ritual. At exactly 9:30 p.m. on gala night, the world would see what I had seen my whole life. Still, part of me ached for something impossible, a version of my mother who would have chosen love over domination. That ghost hovered beside me while I packed my bag, whispering doubts. I told the ghost to leave. The woman she'd shaped me into had no room for ghosts. When the clock hit midnight, I stood by the window and whispered, "Tomorrow the pity ends." The city lights blinked back like 1,000 indifferent witnesses. The gala was hosted in the same hall where she'd once humiliated me during a recital. Walking in felt like reopening an old wound. I wore black, simple and unadorned, the color of truth before it's polished into glamour. Vivian saw me from across the marble floor. For a heartbeat, her smile faltered. Then she glided over, arms outstretched, cameras flashing. "Nora, darling, you came." Her voice wrapped around me like silk soaked in poison. I let her hug me, the click of shutters capturing what looked like reconciliation. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. She leaned close. "Let's not make a scene tonight." I wouldn't dream of it. As speeches began, I moved quietly among servers and technicians. Marcus was in the control booth, disguised as an event assistant. The air shimmered with money and perfume. Celine sang a short tribute piece on the grand piano. Her notes floated like forgiveness I didn't feel. When she finished, Vivian stepped to the podium to thunderous applause. "Tonight," she began, "we celebrate strength born from compassion." At that exact second, Marcus nodded from the booth. I pressed send on my phone, the lights dimmed and the screen behind her flickered to life. At first, people thought it was part of the presentation, grainy footage of Vivian in her bedroom, laughing as she rehearsed a fainting spell. Then came audio of her telling a friend, "Donations are sympathy points, the trick is never looking too healthy." Gasps rippled through the room. Vivian froze, her microphone still live, the video shifted to financial charts, bank transfers and letters signed in her looping script. A reporter recognized the format, an investigative package. "Turn it off," she hissed, but the technicians ignored her. Her face on screen morphed from charm to fury, captured in secret clips I'd recorded during our worst fights. The last image was of me, age 18, crying beside a torn letter. Her voice from that night filled the hall, "You'll never survive without me." Then silence. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "She said I was a mistake. Tonight you've seen her masterpiece." The crowd broke into murmurs, camera phones raised like judgmental stars. Vivian swayed, grabbing the podium for balance, but this time no one rushed to help. For the first time the performance was real, a woman collapsing under the weight of her own script. And I felt nothing but an ache of release. The next morning headlines bloomed like wounds: QUINN Foundation fraud exposed, daughter RELESES evidence of manipulation, reporters camped outside her house, sponsors withdrew, the foundation's website crashed under traffic. Selene called me sobbing. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," I whispered. "You just believed her louder than you heard me." Vivian issued a statement claiming mental exhaustion. Lawyers threatened lawsuits, but the evidence was irrefutable. Within days an audit froze her accounts. I avoided interviews. Marcus handled the media firestorm. I stayed near the coast, sketching waves that broke and rebuilt themselves endlessly. Some nights guilt slipped in, not for what I'd done, but for the small satisfaction I felt watching justice burn bright. I received one letter from my father. He had seen the footage. "You set the truth free," he wrote. "Now set yourself free too." I folded the note into my journal. Freedom, I realized, isn't peace. It's space, the room to finally choose who you'll become when fear no longer tells you where to stand. And I wasn't sure yet what that meant. All I knew was that the house of lies had fallen, and silence no longer belonged to her. Weeks later I visited the mansion one last time. Reporters had moved on, ivy already crept across the gates. Inside, dust muted the opulence. The piano sat uncovered, silent. Vivian was upstairs alone. The nurses had quit when payments stopped. She looked smaller, her elegance reduced to trembling hands. "So," she rasped, "you won." "No," I said quietly. "The truth did." She laughed, a cracked echo of the sound that once ruled my nights. "You think you're free now? You'll spend your life needing me to be the villain." I studied her, a queen without a court, clinging to her crown of pity. "Maybe," I said, "but at least the kingdom's gone." I turned to leave, but her voice followed me, soft, almost pleading. "Nora, don't go." For a heartbeat I almost stayed, but mercy and self-destruction look too much alike when you've been trained to confuse them. At the door I whispered, "You once said I was a mistake born out of pity. Maybe that's true. But look at you now, you need that mistake to remember you existed." Her breath hitched, I walked away. The sunlight on the stairs felt like something sacred and terrifying. For the first time I didn't look back. For days after leaving the mansion I didn't speak to anyone. My voice felt heavy with all the years it had belonged to her. I stayed in a small coastal town where no one recognized my face. The ocean became my therapist, endless, patient, unapologetically loud. At night I'd replay her words, "You'll need me to be the villain." Maybe she was right once. For a long time hatting her gave me purpose, something solid to hold when everything else was fragile. But now there was only stillness. The silence that comes after the storm doesn't bring peace, it brings echoes. One morning I walked to the water and threw my old phone into the waves. It sank fast, taking with it years of messages, recordings, and the ghosts I'd kept archived. A fisherman nearby asked if I was okay. I smiled for the first time in months. "I think so," I said. "It's just strange when freedom feels like grief." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. The tide reached my feet, cold and clear, and in that chill I realized, freedom isn't the absence of chains, it's learning how to walk without the weight you once mistook for love. I started writing letters to her, to Selene, to the version of myself that once begged for permission to exist. I didn't plan to send them. Writing was just a way to drain the poison. "Dear Mother," I wrote, "I used to think I wanted an apology. Now I realize even if you gave one it wouldn't change what I lost. You can't return a childhood, a self, or a sense of worth." I wrote one to Selene, "You weren't cruel, just blind. I forgive you not because you deserve it but because I can't live inside resentment anymore." And one to myself, "You survived being unwanted, that's your superpower. Don't waste it seeking their approval. Each night I burned the pages in a metal bowl. The smoke curled like memories finally learning how to leave. In their ashes I saw fragments of who I'd been, a daughter sculpted from silence and pity. When the last letter turned to grey dust, I whispered, "You can rest now." The wind carried the ashes out the window. It felt like an exorcism, gentle, necessary, and long overdue. Months passed. My story became a headline-turned documentary, then a cautionary tale discussed by strangers online. Some called me brave, others said I'd destroyed a dying woman. Let them talk. They only saw fragments. No one could understand the years between the headlines. One morning, while brushing my hair, I caught my reflection staring back differently. My eyes didn't carry her shape anymore. The lines around them were mine alone, not from fear, but from feeling too much. For the first time I said my name aloud. My name is Nora Quinn. It felt strange and holy, like claiming land after decades of exile. I thought about how pity had built my life's foundation, how it had twisted affection into debt. Now I was rebuilding, one honest truth at a time. I still painted. Only now my canvases weren't grey. They bled with blues, ochres, and reds that didn't apologize for their depth. Every stroke whispered the same thing: you exist. You were never the mistake. You were the correction, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. It was late autumn when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but my heart already knew. Her voice was weaker, slower. "Nora, yes, I don't expect forgiveness," she said. I wanted to hear your voice." There was a tremor in her tone, not the kind that manipulates, but the kind that fears final silence. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The ocean murmured outside my window. "I loved you in my way," she said. "I know," I replied. "That was the problem, your way hurt." A sob broke through her composure, small, human, almost childlike. "I don't have much time," she whispered. I closed my eyes. "Then use what's left to make peace with yourself." We hung up without goodbye. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious either. Just complete. The next week a news alert announced her passing. There were no grand obituaries, only a quiet burial attended by a few distant friends. I didn't go. Some goodbyes are louder when you keep them inside. Years later, I spoke at a small university about resilience. Not revenge, not trauma, just survival. When I finished, a student asked, "Do you ever miss her?" I smiled softly. "No, but I remember her. There's a difference." Afterward, I walked outside into the sunset. The air smelled of rain and renewal. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who begged to be seen, who believed love was earned through suffering. I wanted to tell her that she'd become something extraordinary. I visited the shoreline again, the place where I'd thrown my old phone. The waves still moved with the same eternal rhythm. I whispered into the wind, "I forgive us." For the first time, I didn't feel like a mistake. I felt like a beginning. Somewhere I hoped she saw that too, not to haunt her, but to remind the universe that even from the most pitiful soil, something strong can grow. And maybe that was my true revenge, not her downfall, but my rising. The girl she called a mistake became the woman she could never break, and that was enough.